The seatbelt sign was on, the cabin doors were sealed, and the low hum of the engines promised imminent departure. But for the 187 passengers on Oceanic Air Flight 815 from New York to San Francisco, the journey was about to be stalled by a force more turbulent than any weather human prejudice. From the cockpit, a decorated captain made a decision that would not only ground the aircraft, but shatter his own life. He chose to remove a single passenger, a black woman seated quietly in business class, for reasons he could only justify to himself. What he didn't know was that her last name was a key one that would unlock a world of consequences he never saw coming. This is the story of that flight, that woman, and the moment everything changed. The air inside the cabin of Oceanic Air Flight 815 was a familiar symphony of controlled chaos. The scent of jet fuel and recycled air mingled with the faint aroma of coffee and perfume. Passengers, a river of humanity flowing through the narrow aisle, jostled for overhead bin space, their faces a mixture of travel-worn fatigue and quiet anticipation. In seat 4B, Doctor had already settled in. Her world condensed to the comfortable confines of her business class pod. A well-worn copy of The Emperor of All Maladies rested on her lap, its pages a familiar comfort. Evelyn was a woman whose presence commanded a quiet respect. At 42, she was a leading oncologist at Johns Hopkins, her hands as skilled in the delicate dance of surgery as her mind was in navigating the labyrinthine corridors of cancer research. Her face, framed by elegant shoulder-length braids, was etched with the empathy and exhaustion that came from a life spent in the trenches of human suffering. Today, however, her journey wasn't for a medical conference or a keynote speech. It was personal. Her mother, Eleanor, was in the final fragile stages of a battle with pancreatic cancer in a San Francisco hospice. Every moment was precious, every delay a thief. She glanced out the window, watching the ground crew scurry across the tarmac like ants in the pale morning light of JFK International Airport. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue, a perfect day for flying. A sense of urgency, a low, persistent hum beneath her practiced composure made her wish the plane would just move. She closed her eyes for a moment, picturing her mother's face willing her own strength across the thousands of miles that separated them. In the cockpit just a few feet forward, but a world away, Captain Adam Miller completed his pre-flight checklist with the meticulous precision of a man who had done it 10,000 times before. At 55, Miller was the archetypal airline captain. Silver-streaked hair, a jawline that seemed carved from granite, and a deep, reassuring voice that could calm the most nervous of flyers. He was a pilot's pilot, a man who had dedicated his life to the sky, following in the footsteps of his own father, a legendary captain for the same airline. Adam Miller's world was one of order, procedure, and absolute control. The cockpit was his kingdom, the aircraft his chariot. He believed in rules, in the clear demarcation of authority, and in his own unerring judgment. His record was spotless, his reputation impeccable. But beneath the polished veneer of professionalism lay a deep-seated and unexamined prejudice, a relic of a bygone era inherited from his father, along with the love of flying. He wouldn't call it racism. He would call it situational awareness, a gut feeling for things that were out of place. It was a quiet, insidious bias that saw the world not in shades of grey, but in the stark, simple blacks and whites of his own internal rulebook. He did a final scan of the cabin display monitor, a routine check of his domain. The passengers were settling, the flight attendants moving with practiced efficiency. Then his eyes paused. They zoomed in on seat 4B. Dr. Evelyn Reed. He saw a black woman alone in a premium cabin. Her expression was calm, her posture poised. But Miller's gut, that infallible compass that had guided him through thunderstorms and engine failures, told him something was wrong. It was a feeling he couldn't articulate, a dissonant note in the otherwise perfect symphony of his pre-flight routine. It wasn't logical. It wasn't rational. It was a feeling. "David," he said, his voice flat, not turning to his co-pilot, David Chen. "Take a look at the cabin feed. Seat 4B. David, a bright and capable pilot in his early 30s, leaned forward. He saw a well-dressed woman reading a book. "What about her captain? Just a feeling," Miller grunted. "Something feels off." David Chen looked again, trying to see what the senior pilot saw. He saw nothing. He saw a passenger. "Looks fine to me, Adam. She's just sitting there." Miller didn't respond. He continued to stare at the screen. The seed of an idea, a dangerous, irrational idea, beginning to sprout in the fertile ground of his prejudice. He saw her composure not as dignity, but as a mask. He saw her solitude not as independence, but as suspicious. In his mind, she didn't fit the profile of his typical business-class traveler. And in Adam Miller's world, things that didn't fit were problems to be solved. The lead flight attendant, Sarah Jenkins, gave the final signal from the cabin. "Boarding complete, Captain. Cabin is secure and ready for departure." Miller's hand hovered over the button to close the cockpit door. He should have pressed it. He should have initiated the pushback sequence. But he didn't. The river of passengers had stopped flowing. The doors were sealed, and the jet bridge had pulled away. The plane was an island ready to launch into the sky. Yet it remained stubbornly tethered to the gate by the captain's silent, inexplicable hesitation. He kept looking at the screen at the woman in 4B, who was now looking at her watch, a flicker of concern crossing her features. The perfect blue sky waited. Her dying mother waited. But Captain Adam Miller had decided there was one more piece of business to attend to. The storm wasn't in the sky. It was gathering in the cockpit. The minutes stretched into an uncomfortable eternity. The initial hum of passenger chatter began to curdle into murmurs of confusion and impatience. A flight attendant's voice came over the intercom, a smooth, practiced balm of corporate apology. "Folks, we appreciate your patience. The captain has indicated a slight operational delay. We should have more information for you shortly, and will be underway as soon as possible." For Evelyn, the words operational delay were a sharp jab of anxiety. She checked her phone again. No new messages from her sister in San Francisco. That was good, but the silence was its own kind of torture. She needed to be there. The delay felt like a physical weight pressing down on her. In the cockpit, Captain Miller had made his decision. His gut feeling had now blossomed into a full-blown, albeit baseless conviction. He was the commander of this vessel, and his primary duty was safety. He would frame it as a security issue, a vague but unimpeachable justification. "David," he said, his voice now hard with resolve. "I'm not comfortable with the passenger in 4B. I want her removed." David Chen swiveled in his seat, his expression a mask of disbelief. "Removed on what grounds, Captain? She hasn't done anything. We can't just remove a paying passenger because of a feeling. She's making me uneasy." Miller retorted, his eyes cold. "Her behavior is unusual. Too calm. It's a security precaution. I'm not taking any chances. That's my final call." "Adam, this is insane," David whispered, leaning closer. "You're going to create a massive incident. The company, the FAA, They're not going to accept unease as a valid reason for removal. She's a black woman in business class. Think about how this looks. I am thinking. Miller snapped his authority, absolute in the confined space. I'm thinking about the other 186 souls on this plane, and I'm thinking about my license. I am the pilot in command. My decision is final. Now get Sarah up here. Defeated David pressed the call button. The power gradient in the cockpit was as steep as a cliff face. A co-pilot could advise, but a captain could command. Challenging a direct order on a matter the captain had framed as security was a career-ending move. Sarah Jenkins, the lead flight attendant, entered the cockpit, her smile ready. "Yes, Captain." "Sarah." Miller began, his tone grave and official. "We have a delicate situation. There's a passenger in seat 4B, a Dr. Reed. Due to a security concern that I am not at liberty to discuss, I need you to inform her that she will not be flying with us today. You'll need to escort her off the aircraft." Sarah's professional smile vanished, replaced by a look of stunned confusion. She had seen the passenger in 4B, a polite, quiet woman who had simply asked for a glass of water and opened her book. "A security concern, Captain. Did she make a threat? Is she on a watch list?" "Just tell her there's an issue with her ticket that can't be resolved on board," Miller instructed, avoiding the question. "Be discreet. We don't want to cause a scene." "Captain, with all due respect, she hasn't done anything," Sarah protested, her voice trembling slightly. "I can't just remove her." "What is the reason?" "The reason," Miller said, his voice dropping to a low, menacing growl, "is that I have ordered you to do so. Are you refusing a direct command from your captain, Ms. Jenkins?" The threat hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Sarah, a single mother with a mortgage, felt a chill run down her spine. Her career, her livelihood was on the line. She looked at David, who gave a nearly imperceptible shake of his head, a silent apology. He was trapped, and so was she. "No, Captain," she said, her voice barely a whisper. She turned and walked back into the cabin, her heart pounding against her ribs. Every step toward seat 4B felt like a walk toward a moral precipice. She knelt beside Evelyn's seat, forcing a pained, apologetic smile. "Dr. Reed, I am so terribly sorry. My name is Sarah. I'm the lead flight attendant." Evelyn looked up from her book, her intelligent eyes searching Sarah's face. "Is everything all right? Ma'am, I'm afraid there seems to be an issue with your reservation." Sarah began the lie, tasting like ash in her mouth. "It's a ticketing problem that unfortunately we can't sort out from the aircraft. We're going to need you to deplane and speak with the gate agent." Evelyn's brow furrowed. "A ticketing issue? That's impossible. I booked this flight weeks ago. It was confirmed yesterday. I am checked in." Her voice was calm, but a new edge of steel had entered it. She knew a flimsy excuse when she heard one. "I understand, ma'am, and I am truly sorry for the inconvenience." Sarah stammered, acutely aware of the nearby passengers who were now openly listening, their phones held loosely in their laps. "But the captain has insisted. We cannot depart until you have deplaned." Evelyn looked past Sarah down the aisle toward the cockpit door. The dots connected in her mind with the cold, brutal clarity of a cancer diagnosis. The delay, the nonsensical excuse. She had experienced the subtle stings of prejudice her entire life, but this was something else entirely. This was a public, professional shaming. "I see," Evelyn said, her voice dropping to a quiet, firm register. "No, I don't think I will be deplaning. My ticket is valid." My reason for travel is urgent. If the captain has a problem with my presence on his aircraft, I suggest he come and explain it to me himself, to my face." Her refusal, delivered not with hysteria, but with unshakable resolve, sent a ripple through the cabin. A man in the row behind a burly salesman type huffed, "Just get off the plane, lady. We all want to get going." From across the aisle, a young woman in a university sweatshirt retorted, "Why should she? They haven't given her a real reason." The cabin was now a tinderbox. Sarah stood up, her face pale, and looked helplessly toward the cockpit. She had failed in her mission of a discreet removal. The scene Miller wanted to avoid was now unfolding, and it was about to get much, much worse. The entire plane was watching, waiting to see what would happen next. And in the cockpit, Captain Adam Miller realized his attempt to delegate his dirty work had failed. He would have to step out of his kingdom and into the fray himself. The cockpit door hissed open, and Captain Adam Miller emerged, his uniform immaculate, his face a mask of stern authority. He strode down the aisle, his presence intended to quell any dissent, to be the final word in a matter he considered closed. The murmuring in the cabin died down, replaced by a thick, expectant silence. Phones were now being held up more overtly, their small red recording lights blinking like malevolent eyes. He stopped at row 4, towering over the seated Dr. Reed. He did not make eye contact with her directly, instead addressing the space just above her head. "Ma'am," he began, his voice echoing with the practiced resonance of 100 pre-flight announcements. "I am Captain Miller. There has been a request for you to deplane. We cannot proceed until you comply. Please don't make this more difficult than it needs to be." Evelyn slowly lifted her gaze from her book, closing it, and placing it deliberately on the empty seat beside her. She met his eyes, and for the first time Miller felt a flicker of something other than self-assurance. He saw not fear or intimidation, but a profound and piercing intelligence. "Captain Miller," Evelyn replied, her voice steady and clear, carrying easily through the silent cabin. "I have been asked to deplane, but I have not been given a reason. Your flight attendant mentioned a ticketing issue, which both she and I know is a fabrication. So I will ask you directly, on what grounds are you removing me, a confirmed ticketed passenger, from this flight?" The directness of the question, the use of the word fabrication, threw Miller off his script. He was accustomed to compliance, to his uniform doing the talking. "I am not required to share the specifics of a security assessment with a passenger," he said stiffly. "The decision has been made for the safety and security of everyone on board. It is my final word." A gasp rippled through the nearby seats. The word security hung in the air, a loaded and ugly implication. Evelyn's expression hardened, the last vestiges of patience evaporating. The quiet, personal battle she was fighting to get to her mother's bedside had just collided with a public, systemic one she had fought her entire life. "Security," she repeated, her voice laced with a cold, incredulous fury. "Are you implying that I, a board-certified oncologist on her way to her dying mother's bedside, am a threat to your aircraft? Is it my medical bag, Captain, or is it simply the color of my skin that you've assessed as a security concern?" The accusation landed like a physical blow. Miller's face flushed a deep, mottled red. "That is an outrageous allegation," he sputtered, his composure cracking. "This has nothing to do with race." "Then what?" Evelyn pressed her voice, rising slightly. "Does it have to do with... Tell me. Tell every passenger on this plane whose travel you are delaying what specific action I have taken to warrant being treated like a criminal. You are the captain. Your final word requires a basis in fact, not in prejudice. So provide it." He had no answer. There was no specific action, no threat, no basis. There was only his gut feeling. He was exposed, his authority revealed not as a tool of safety, but as a bludgeon of bias, and everyone could see it. He was drowning, and in his desperation, he reached for the only piece of information he had, hoping to re-establish his dominance. "Dr. Reed," he said, infusing her name with a dismissive condescension. "My decision stands. If you do not deplane voluntarily, I will have Port Authority police board this aircraft and remove you forcibly." It was his last card, the ultimate threat. He expected it to crush her resolve. He was wrong. Evelyn stared at him for a long, silent moment. She saw the panic behind his eyes, the hollow shell of his authority. She had been polite. She had been firm. She had tried reason. Now all that was left was the truth, a truth she guarded fiercely for privacy, but one she would now deploy as a weapon of last resort. She let out a slow, deliberate breath. "Captain Miller," she said, her voice now devoid of all emotion, cold and precise as a scalpel. "You seem to be operating under a severe deficit of information. You have questioned my ticket, my character, and my right to be on this flight. Perhaps you should have done your due diligence." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "Before you call the Port Authority and irrevocably destroy your career, I have a suggestion. I suggest you return to your cockpit. I suggest you contact your corporate headquarters, and I suggest you ask them to verify the full passenger manifest, specifically the details for the passenger in seat 4B. Miller scoffed. "I have the manifest, Dr. Reed. I know who you are." "No, Captain," she said, leaning forward slightly. "You truly don't. You see, the name on my ticket is Reed. It's my mother's name, the one I use professionally. My full legal name, however, is Dr. Evelyn Reed Sterling." The name Sterling hung in the air, meaningless to the other passengers, but for Miller, it was the sound of a guillotine blade being released. Sterling. There was only one Sterling that mattered at Oceanic Air. Evelyn delivered the final devastating blow. "My father is Jonathan Sterling. He's the chairman and chief executive officer of this airline. I would imagine he'll be very interested in the security assessment you've conducted on his daughter. So please, Captain, make the call. I'll wait." A wave of shock washed over Adam Miller's face, so profound it was almost comical. The blood drained from his features, leaving him a ghastly pale white. Sterling. Jonathan Sterling. The titan of the industry. The ruthless, brilliant, and notoriously private man who had built Oceanic Air into a global giant. Miller had seen him once from a distance at a shareholders' meeting. The man exuded more power in his silence than Miller did in his full-dress uniform. He stumbled backward, his carefully constructed world crumbling into dust. The sneering authority vanished, replaced by the raw, primal terror of a man who has just realized he has pointed a loaded gun at his own head and pulled the trigger. Without another word, he turned and fled back to the sanctuary of the cockpit. His clumsy retreat a stark contrast to his arrogant entrance. The cabin erupted in a storm of hushed, frantic whispers. David Chen, watching from the co-pilot seat, saw the captain's face and knew instantly that the world had just turned upside down. Miller collapsed into his chair, his hands trembling so violently he could barely unlatch the radio handset. His voice, when he finally spoke to the operations center, was a strangled, unrecognizable croak. "Oceanic Ops. This is Captain Miller, Flight 815. I need you to verify a passenger's details. Seat 4B, Reed, Evelyn Reed. I need you to check for a hyphenated name." Sterling. Reed Sterling. The silence on the other end of the line was only a few seconds, but for Adam Miller it was a lifetime. Then the calm, dispassionate voice of the dispatcher came back, sealing his doom. Affirmative flight 815. Passenger in 4B is Dr. Evelyn Reed Sterling. VIP code flagged. Daughter of CEO Jonathan Sterling. Is there a problem, Captain? Adam Miller let the handset fall from his limp fingers. A problem. Yes, there was a problem. And he was at the very center of it. The silence in the cockpit was absolute, broken only by the frantic thumping of Adam Miller's own heart. The dispatcher's words echoed in his head. VIP code flagged. Daughter of CEO Jonathan Sterling. It was a death sentence delivered in the bland parlance of airline operations. He stared at the instrument panel, the glowing lights and numbers that had been his life's language, but they were now just a meaningless blur. David Chen watched him, a mixture of pity and vindicated anger in his eyes. "Adam, what have you done?" he asked softly. Miller didn't answer. He was paralyzed, caught in a feedback loop of pure terror. He saw his career, his pension, his house, his carefully curated life of respect and authority all turning to smoke. He had not just insulted a passenger, he had publicly humiliated the daughter of the most powerful man in the entire aviation industry. A man known for his unforgiving nature when it came to the airline's reputation, a reputation Miller had just set on fire in the middle of a fully boarded Airbus A330. The call button from the cabin chirped a shrill, insistent sound that jolted Miller from his stupor. It was Sarah. David answered it. "Go ahead, Sarah." David. Her voice was strained. "The entire cabin knows something has happened. People are looking up Jonathan Sterling on their phones. The captain, he needs to do something. He needs to come out here and fix this." Fix this. The idea was laughable. It was like trying to unring a bell or put a bullet back in a gun. But he had to do something. Resigning himself to the inevitable, Miller unbuckled his seatbelt. His movements were stiff robotic, the movements of a man walking to his own execution. He had to face her. He had to apologize. He emerged from the cockpit for the second time. The atmosphere in the cabin had changed completely. The tension and anger had been replaced by a stunned electric silence. The passengers weren't just watching a drama anymore. They were witnessing a spectacular corporate immolation. Every eye was on him, but he only saw one person, Dr. Evelyn Reed Sterling. She was exactly as he had left her, poised and calm, but her eyes held a new weight. It wasn't triumph. It was a profound, weary disappointment. He walked the short distance, each step heavier than the last, and stopped before her. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a desperate, hollowed-out humility. "The hot door to Dr. Reed Sterling," he began, his voice cracking. The use of her full name was an admission of his total defeat. I have made a grievous error, a terrible, inexcusable error in judgment. I apologize. I am deeply sorry for my conduct, for the distress I have caused you." Evelyn listened, her expression unreadable. The apology hung in the air, thin and inadequate. "Your apology is noted, Captain," she said, her voice even. She did not say it was accepted. "May we please depart now? As I mentioned, I have a family emergency." Her response was a masterclass in controlled power. She didn't yell, she didn't demand. She simply redirected him to his duty, reminding him of the personal cost of his actions. She had already won. There was nothing more to say. Humiliated Miller nodded numbly. Yes. Of course. He turned and addressed the cabin, his voice trembling. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to offer my most sincere apologies for the extended delay. This was due to an internal miscommunication that has now been resolved. Cabin crew, please prepare for immediate departure. He retreated to the cockpit, the gazes of 187 passengers burning into his back. He closed the door, shutting out the world he had just broken. The pushback commenced almost immediately. As the plane was guided onto the taxiway, David handled the radio communications, his voice crisp and professional. Miller just sat there, staring blankly ahead, his hands resting uselessly in his lap. The flight to San Francisco was 5 hours and 47 minutes of the most exquisite torture Adam Miller had ever endured. The aircraft, once his kingdom, was now his prison cell. Every slight bump of turbulence felt like a judgment. Every call from the cabin made him jump. He was a ghost in his own cockpit, the title of captain, now a bitter mockery. He replayed the events over and over. The initial glance at the monitor, the baseless suspicion, the confrontation, the sneer with which he had said her name, Dr. Reed. And then her response, the calm, deliberate detonation of his world, Reed Sterling. How could he have been so stupid, so arrogant? The prejudice he had harbored for years, the one he had always disguised as instinct, had finally risen up and bitten him with fatal venom. He thought of his wife Maria and their comfortable life in a leafy Connecticut suburb. He thought of his 2 college-aged children whose tuition was paid for by his handsome salary. He thought of the respect he commanded in his community, the pride he took in his uniform. It was all gone. He knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that by the time the wheels of this aircraft touched down in San Francisco, his life as he knew it would be over. For Evelyn, the flight was a surreal experience. The flight attendants treated her with a new, almost fearful deference. Sarah Jenkins approached her, mid-flight, her eyes red-rimmed. "Dr. Reed Sterling." Sarah whispered, "I just want to say, I am so sorry. What I did was wrong. I should have refused the order, no matter the consequences." Evelyn looked at the distraught flight attendant and saw not an antagonist, but another cog in a machine of bias. "I understand you were in an impossible position, Sarah," she said, her voice softening with a trace of its usual empathy. "The fault does not lie with you." The kindness seemed to break Sarah, and she hurried away before the tears could fall. Evelyn turned back to the window, watching the vast expanse of the American heartland roll by beneath her. She felt no joy in the captain's humiliation. She only felt a deep, abiding sadness. This incident wasn't just about a rogue pilot. It was about a system that allowed a man like that to hold so much power, to have his prejudices validated as security concerns until they collided with a bigger power, the power of a name. What if she had just been Dr. Evelyn Reed, oncologist? Would she be in a Port Authority holding cell right now? Her pleas of a dying mother ignored, the thought sent a shiver through her. As the plane began its final descent into San Francisco, the iconic shape of the Golden Gate Bridge piercing through the coastal fog, Evelyn put her book away. Her personal mission was almost complete, but a new, unexpected one was just beginning. The moment the plane connected with the runway, a smooth, perfect landing executed by the co-pilot David Chen, a sense of finality descended. For Miller, it was the sound of the end. For Evelyn, it was the beginning of whatever came next. When the fasten seatbelt sign pinged off at the gate, she gathered her things. Her composure fully restored. As she deplaned, she didn't look toward the cockpit. She didn't need to. The consequences were already in motion. And as she stepped onto the jet bridge, she saw them waiting for her two grim-faced men in dark suits. They weren't police. They were the airline's top executives, and they were not there to greet the captain. The two men on the jet bridge were not just any executives. The taller, older man was Richard Davenport, the executive vice president of flight operations. The other was Marcus Thorne, the head of the airline's legal department. Their presence at the gate for this specific flight was the corporate equivalent of a public execution. They greeted Evelyn with solemn deference. "Dr. Reed Sterling," Davenport said, his voice low. "I am Richard Davenport. On behalf of Oceanic Air, I cannot begin to express our horror and regret for what you have experienced. We have a private car waiting to take you wherever you need to go." "My father called you," Evelyn stated. It wasn't a question. "He did," Davenport confirmed. "He was unequivocal in his instructions." As Evelyn was whisked away, a different kind of reception was being prepared for Captain Miller. He was the last to leave the cockpit, a tradition he had always cherished, a final moment of quiet authority. Today, it felt like a walk of shame. As he stepped onto the jet bridge, Davenport and Thorne blocked his path. Their faces were granite. "Adam," Davenport said, dispensing with the formality of captain. "Hand me your ID badge and keys. You're on immediate indefinite suspension pending a full investigation. You will be flown back to New York in coach on the next available flight. You are not to speak to the media. You are not to speak to the crew. You are not to speak to anyone. Is that clear?" Miller, numb and defeated, fumbled with his lanyard, his trembling fingers struggling with the clasp. He handed over the plastic card that symbolized his entire professional identity. The weight of its absence was immediate and crushing. "You'll be met at JFK." Thorne, the lawyer, added, his voice cold as ice. "A meeting has been arranged for you. At corporate headquarters. Tomorrow morning, 0800 sharp, with Mr. Sterling." The name hit Miller like a physical blow. A meeting with Jonathan Sterling himself. This wasn't just about being fired. This was going to be personal. He was escorted through a private corridor, away from the prying eyes of the public, treated not like a veteran captain, but like a disgraced liability. The next morning, Adam Miller stood outside the imposing glass tower of the Oceanic Air headquarters in Queens. He was wearing his best suit, but it felt like a costume. He looked like a man who had been hollowed out, his pride and arrogance replaced by a gnawing, bottomless dread. He was shown to the top floor, a hushed, opulent space with panoramic views of the city. The office of Jonathan Sterling was larger than Miller's first apartment. At the far end, behind a vast mahogany desk, sat the man himself. Jonathan Sterling was in his late 60s, with a mane of white hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He was not looking at Miller. He was looking at a tablet in his hands. "Sit," Sterling said, without looking up. The single word was a command, not an invitation. Miller sat in the leather chair, opposite the desk, feeling small and insignificant. For 5 full minutes, Sterling did not speak. He continued to swipe and read from his tablet, the only sound in the room, the quiet tap of his finger on the glass. It was a calculated display of power, designed to unnerve and dismantle. It worked. By the time Sterling finally set the tablet down, Miller was drenched in a cold sweat. "Captain Miller." Sterling began, his voice surprisingly soft, yet carrying an immense weight. "I have spent the last 12 hours reviewing every facet of yesterday's incident. I have your complete service record. 32 years of exemplary flying. Not a single blemish. commendations for handling an engine fire over the Atlantic, praised for a textbook landing in a typhoon in Hong Kong, by all accounts a pilot's pilot. He paused, letting the praise hang in the air for a moment, before snatching it away. I've also read the full transcript of your communications. I've read the preliminary statements from your co-pilot, Mr. Chen, and your lead flight attendant, Ms. Jenkins, and I have watched 12 different passenger videos of your performance. Sterling leaned forward, his blue eyes locking onto Miller's. So tell me, Captain, after 32 years of perfection, what was it about my daughter that suddenly short-circuited your exemplary judgment? Help me understand the security assessment that led you to publicly harass and attempt to remove a decorated oncologist from your aircraft. Miller opened his mouth, but no words came out. What could he say? It was a gut feeling. Was she loud? Captain. Sterling pressed his voice, still deceptively calm. Was she disruptive? Did she refuse to comply with crew instructions? Did she make a threat? No, she was reading a book on the very subject she has dedicated her life to fighting, a fight she excels at. She saves lives, Captain Miller. What did you do yesterday? You delayed her from getting to her own mother's deathbed. The words were like daggers. Miller flinched. You didn't see a doctor. Sterling continued, his voice hardening. You saw a black woman in a seat you felt she didn't belong in. You cloaked your bigotry in the language of security and leveraged the authority this company gave you to enforce it. You didn't just endanger this airline's reputation, which you most certainly did. You didn't just violate half a dozen federal regulations against discrimination, which you most certainly did. You used the cockpit of a $100 million aircraft as your own private fiefdom to enact a petty racist power play. Sterling stood up and walked to the window looking out over the runways of JFK. My daughter didn't ask for any of this. She is a private person. She uses her mother's name to avoid the very circus you created. All she wanted to do was say goodbye to her mother. Instead, you made her a symbol. The story is already everywhere, Mr. Miller. Your name, your face, it's on every news site. You're famous. He turned back from the window, his face a mask of cold fury. So here is what is going to happen. Your employment with Oceanic Air is terminated effective immediately. Your severance is void. Your pension is under legal review. We are filing a formal complaint with the FAA recommending the permanent revocation of your pilot's license. Furthermore, our legal team will be filing a civil suit against you personally for damages to our brand and reputation. The videos shot by the passengers will make for a compelling Exhibit A. Miller's world dissolved. This was beyond firing. This was annihilation. But Mr. Sterling, my life, my family, he stammered. You should have thought of your family yesterday. Sterling cut him off. You should have thought of them before you decided to abuse your power. You seem to have forgotten a fundamental rule of the universe, Mr. Miller. Karma. It can be a real son of a bitch. Sterling gestured to the door. Security will escort you out. Your personal effects from your locker will be mailed to you. Goodbye, Mr. Miller. Adam Miller stumbled out of the office, a broken man. As he was led through the lobby, he saw his face on a television screen in the corner, a news report detailing the airline captain fired in viral racism incident. His phone buzzed in his pocket. It was his wife, Maria. He didn't have the strength to answer. He knew what the call was about. She had seen the news. Their life, built on the foundation of his prestigious career, had just been demolished. The hammer of karma had not just fallen, it had pulverized him. The passage of 6 months can feel like a lifetime, or the blink of an eye depending on which side of fate's ledger one lands. For the central figures of the Oceanic Air Flight 815 incident time had proven to be both a relentless corrosive and a powerful catalyst. For Adam Miller, time was a slow, grinding erosion of self. His precipitous fall from grace was now complete a case study in corporate and social justice that had long faded from the 24-hour news cycle, leaving him in its silent, desolate wake. The world had moved on, but he was permanently anchored to the worst day of his life. His new reality was the acrid smell of sawdust and paint thinner at a sprawling, impersonal hardware store in a town where no one knew his name. The crisp, authoritative uniform of a 4-stripe captain was a ghostly memory, replaced by a drab red polo shirt with a plastic name tag that simply read, Adam. He who had once been responsible for hundreds of souls at 35,000 feet was now responsible for helping indecisive customers choose between eggshell and satin finishes. The humiliation was a constant low-grade fever. One afternoon, a man in a sharp suit, radiating the easy confidence of a frequent flyer, strode up to him. "Excuse me," the man said, snapping his fingers. "I need a specific type of anchor bolt for drywall. The ones that expand. You know what I'm talking about." Adam knew exactly what he was talking about. He also knew the subtle arrogance in the man's tone, the casual dismissal. It was the way he himself had once viewed the world from the pedestal of the cockpit. "Aisle 7, Adam mumbled, pointing. "Molly bolts." The man squinted at him. "You look familiar. Do I know you from somewhere?" "You a pilot?" Adam's blood ran cold. He felt a phantom weight on his shoulders where the epaulets used to be. "No," he said, his voice a dry rasp. "I just have one of those faces." He turned and walked away, his heart hammering, seeking refuge in the dusty solitude of the lumber section. His life outside the store was even more barren. The sprawling Connecticut home, once a testament to his success, was gone, liquidated to appease the voracious appetite of the Oceanic Air legal team. His wife, Maria, was also gone. The final conversation had been brief and brutal, held in the echoing emptiness of their half-packed living room. "It's not just the money, Adam," she had said, her voice devoid of its usual warmth. "It's the shame. But more than that, it's the realization. I spent 30 years married to a uniform, to a hero pilot. I never knew the man inside it was capable of such ugliness, such casual cruelty. I look at you now and I don't know who you are." He had tried to argue, to explain it was a mistake, a moment of bad judgment. But she had held up a hand. "Was it? Or was it the first time your judgment was truly tested and the real you showed up? I watched the video, Adam. The sneer on your face when you said her name. That wasn't a mistake, that was you." Now he lived in a 3rd-floor walk-up apartment that overlooked a parking lot. The decor was a mismatched collection of things Maria hadn't wanted. Silence was his constant companion, broken only by the drone of the television he watched, but never absorbed. Some nights he would see the strobing lights of a jet climbing into the night sky through his greasy window. He would feel a visceral ache, a longing for the cool, controlled darkness of the cockpit, for the view of a world carpeted in light, for the feeling of power and purpose. He had been a king in that sky. Now he was trapped on the ground, pinned by the gravity of his own actions. He was no longer Captain Miller. He was just Adam, a man who had flown so high only to discover he had no idea how to live on the earth or cool. He was haunted, not just by what he had lost, but by the gnawing, undeniable truth that he had deserved to lose it. On the other side of the continent, Dr. Evelyn Reed Sterling was charting a very different trajectory. The 6 months following the incident had been a period of immense grief, but also of unexpected transformation. She had been by her mother's side when she passed, holding her hand, a final peaceful goodbye that she knew had almost been stolen from her. The thought was a chilling reminder of the stakes that day. She returned to her work at Johns Hopkins, immersing herself in the familiar, demanding world of oncology. She sought refuge in the elegant logic of science, in the tangible goal of healing her patients. She wanted nothing more than to retreat into the quiet, professional life she had built, the life where she was Dr. Reed. But the world and her father had other plans. 2 months after the funeral, Jonathan Sterling flew to Baltimore to meet her. They sat in her quiet, book-lined office at the hospital, the scent of antiseptic lingering in the air. "The internal investigation is complete," her father said, his tone businesslike, but his eyes full of concern. "Miller was just the tip of the iceberg. We found a culture of complacency. Co-pilots and flight attendants afraid to challenge a captain's gut feeling, no matter how biased. We need to tear it down and rebuild it." "Then do it," Evelyn said. "You're the CEO." "I am," he agreed. "And we are. We're launching a new foundation, a 7-figure endowment to start. Its sole purpose will be to develop and implement the most advanced anti-bias, de-escalation, and cultural competency training the industry has ever seen. We're calling it the Reed Initiative for Inclusive Skies." Evelyn stared at him. "After my mother. That's a wonderful tribute, Dad." "It's not just for her," he said, leaning forward. "It's for you. And I want you to lead it." Evelyn recoiled as if struck. "Me, Dad, no. Absolutely not. I'm a doctor. I'm a scientist. I'm not a public speaker or a corporate executive. I don't want that life. The incident was a nightmare. I don't want to relive it every day." "I know," her father said softly. "But I need you to think about something. What happened to you was monstrous. But it ended when you said your full name. The system stopped because it ran into a bigger power, me. But what happens to the woman in seat 4B, whose father isn't the CEO? What happens when she's just a doctor or a teacher or a sales manager? She gets dragged off the plane. She gets put in a holding cell. Her life gets turned upside down because of a man like Miller. You have a chance, Evelyn, to be a voice for all of them. To use the platform you never asked for, to fix the system that failed you and fails people like you every single day. Your composure, your intellect, your experience. You're the only one who can do this with the credibility it needs." His words hit their mark. She thought of her entire life, the small slights and the giant hurdles and the quiet strength her mother had instilled in her. Her father was right. Her name had been a shield. Now it had to be a sword, not for revenge, but for reform. She took on the role, but on her own terms. She wasn't just a figurehead. She applied her scientific rigor to the problem. She brought in sociologists, psychologists, and aviation experts. She insisted that David Chen and Sarah Jenkins, the co-pilot and flight attendant, be brought in as paid consultants, their experience is crucial to understanding the power dynamics in the cabin. Together they helped design interactive modules and VR simulations that put pilots and crew in difficult, ambiguous situations, teaching them to question their own biases in real time. Her public role evolved as well. Her speeches became must-see events at industry conferences. She was not a firebrand. She was a healer using logic and empathy to diagnose a systemic illness. This new path culminated in an address to the graduating class of a prestigious flight academy. She stood at the podium, a portrait of calm authority, looking out at the sea of eager, idealistic faces. "Good morning," she began, her voice filling the auditorium. "Many of you probably know my story, or at least the viral version of it. But I'm not here to talk about one bad pilot. I'm here to talk about one good flight attendant and one good co-pilot who were trapped in a system that taught them that a captain's authority was more important than their own morality. I'm here to talk about the 185 other passengers who had to bear witness to an injustice, unsure of how to act. The most critical instrument in your cockpit is not the altimeter or the attitude indicator." She continued, her gaze sweeping across the young faces. "It is your own character. It is the part of you that asks, why, when you feel a baseless suspicion. It is the part of you that chooses empathy over ego. Your uniform grants you immense authority, but it does not grant you infallibility. Never mistake your gut feeling for fact, and never allow your prejudice to fly under the banner of security. The sky you are about to command is vast and open. It belongs to everyone. Your most profound duty beyond safety is to ensure that the cabin you command reflects that same boundless spirit of inclusion." As she spoke, she felt a sense of peace. She had taken the ugliest moment of her life and forged it into a purpose. The karma of Flight 8115 was a strange and powerful force. For Adam Miller, it was the crushing gravity of a life ruined by hate. For her, it was the unexpected lift of a new calling, one that allowed her to soar higher and bring more people with her than she ever could have in Seat 4B. The story of Flight 815 is a stark and dramatic reminder that our choices have consequences and that prejudice, no matter how deeply buried, will eventually find its way to the surface. Captain Miller believed his authority made him untouchable, but he learned that true power lies not in a title, but in character. Dr. Evelyn Reed Sterling's name may have been the key that unlocked his downfall, but it was her dignity and strength that transformed a moment of personal humiliation into a catalyst for industry-wide change. It's a powerful lesson in accountability and the unexpected ways karma delivers its verdict. If this story of real-life drama and hard-hitting consequences resonated with you, please take a moment to hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And be sure to subscribe to our channel for more compelling stories that explore the depths of human nature. Thank you for watching.